On a humid July night in 1973, inside the Las Vegas Hilton showroom, nearly 18,000 people packed the velvet seats, the lights cut, the orchestra swelled, yet a single balcony voice broke the illusion. A widowed father, trembling with grief, shouted words no one expected. What Elvis did next left thousands utterly silent. Behind the curtain, Elvis adjusted the collar of his new jumpsuit, stitched with gold embroidery. The orchestra tuned, strings quivering with anticipation. Stagehands whispered about how tickets had been scalped for 3 times their face value. In the lobby, reporters jotted notes for reviews that were already half-written. Another sellout, another triumph. The mood was electric, and every fan sensed that history could break open at any second. Then the house lights dimmed. The orchestra struck its first thunderous chord. A wave of screams ripped across the hall, piercing, frantic, unstoppable. Women stood on chairs, men cupped hands around mouths, hollering his name. When Elvis strode into the spotlight, the room shifted into frenzy, bodies surging forward as if the stage itself were magnetic. For the first few songs, he was a storm. CC Rider shook the rafters, scarves were tossed, hands reached skyward, flashbulbs cracked like lightning. You could feel the floor itself vibrating beneath the weight of thousands stamping in rhythm. But in the middle of it all, subtle things hinted at a deeper undercurrent. On stage left, guitarist James Burton gave a glance to the bandleader, as if tonight's energy was sharper, more volatile than usual. In the back rows, ushers like Carla Jennings pressed against the walls, eyes darting from row to row, watching fans push closer than security preferred. Yet within the chaos, a strange calm hovered, as though something unscripted was waiting just beyond the spotlight. The audience, roaring and ravenous, didn't notice it at first, but Elvis seemed to. Between verses, his gaze flickered toward the balcony, lingering for a heartbeat too long. Have you ever been in a room where the very air felt charged, as if everyone sensed something was about to happen, though no one could name it yet? That's what the Hilton showroom carried that night. A tension humming beneath the cheers. Elvis launched into You Gave Me a Mount. The brass swelled, the strings surged. He leaned into the lyric with unusual weight, eyes half closed as though the song carried a private burden. Fans swayed, couples clutched hands tighter, the entire room wrapped in the tale of loss and struggle. But then, something cut through. At first it was faint, nearly drowned by the orchestra. A voice, ragged and uneven, echoing from the balcony's far corner. Some thought it was shouting, others thought it was laughter. But as the words grew clearer, the truth sank in. It wasn't noise, it was. And in that instant, 18,000 heads began to turn. The cheers faltered, the orchestra wavered. Somewhere above, one man's cry was about to slice through the performance, like a blade through silk. The Hilton showroom, built for thunderous applause, was about to fall into a silence no one could have predicted. The concert had ended, but the energy still pulsed through the cavernous Hilton showroom. The lights dimmed, the curtain drew back, and the audience lingered in their seats, reluctant to let go of the moment. Elvis had given them every ounce of himself, sweat dripping from his brow, voice soaring, the white jumpsuit shimmering under the stage light. But off stage, in the quiet that follows thunder, another story unfolded. Back in the dressing room, Elvis sat slumped in a chair, the cheers outside muffled into a low hum. His hands rested heavily on his knees, the diamond-studded rings catching fragments of stray light. For most, this was the peak. Money, fame, the adoration of thousands. Yet in that silence, the king of rock and roll seemed small, almost boyish. Then came the knock, a hesitant tap, as if the visitor wasn't sure they should even disturb him. One of the security men cracked the door. A mother stepped inside, holding her son by the shoulders. The boy couldn't have been more than 10. His crutches clicked against the floor as he made his way into the room. Elvis looked up. The crowd had screamed his name moments earlier, but now his gaze was locked on one child, moving slowly, carefully, with eyes full of wonder. Elvis didn't hesitate. He rose to his feet, walked toward the boy, and knelt down so their eyes were level. No cameras, no flashing bulb, just a man and a child. "Hey, little man," Elvis said softly, his southern drawl carrying none of the stage bravado. He asked his name, about school, about his favorite songs. The boy stammered answers, his voice shaky with awe. Elvis reached out, steadying him with a gentle hand on the arm. In that room, the titles King, Superstar, Icon fell away. What remained was Elvis Aaron Presley, the kid from Tupelo, who knew what it felt like to long for something more. He signed the boy's program, not with a hurried scribble, but slowly, carefully, as though each letter carried weight. Then, almost instinctively, Elvis slipped off one of his scarves, still damp from the show, and draped it around the child's neck. The boy's face lit up, his mother's eyes welled with tears. Moments later they were gone. No announcement was made, no press release followed. To Elvis, it was just what you did. You gave a little of yourself when you saw someone who needed it. But for that child, the memory would never fade. And for those who witnessed it, the security guard leaning in the doorway, the stagehand frozen with a coil of cable in his hands. It was a glimpse of the true Elvis, not the legend, not the spectacle, but the man whose greatness wasn't measured only in the songs he sang, but in the quiet gestures no stage ever saw. The Hilton showroom emptied, but the echo of applause seemed to haunt the corridors. Elvis lingered behind, still wrapped in the residue of his performance. To the public, he was invincible, a man in a glittering suit, commanding the stage with ease. But away from the spotlight, the weight of the crown pressed heavier than any jeweled belt around his waist. Las Vegas had become both a throne and a prison. Night after night, Elvis walked onto that same stage, his voice carrying the same power, his moves as sharp as ever. Yet inside, something frayed. The routine blurred into repetition. The crowd demanded the king. But Elvis the man, was quietly vanishing beneath them. Everywhere he turned, someone needed something. The colonel pushed for more shows, more contracts, more money. Friends and hangers-on filled the rooms, laughing too loudly, eating, drinking, living off his orbit. To them, Elvis wasn't a man. He was a machine that never stopped giving. And Elvis, bound by loyalty and fear of letting anyone down, kept feeding the machine. The crown glistened in the limelight, but behind it lay exhaustion. His body, once lithe and powerful, grew heavier under the strain. The long nights, the pills to sleep, the pills to wake, the pills to keep going. It all piled on. What the audience saw as dazzling energy was often a fragile thread, stitched together by sheer will. And yet, even in this struggle, Elvis gave himself away freely. After every performance, he'd sign autographs until his wrist ached. He'd hand out scarves until the last one was gone. He'd smile, pose, reassure, never letting the crowd glimpse how drained he truly was. There was a contradiction at the heart of his existence. Elvis longed for normalcy, for the chance to simply sit at a table, eat a meal, and laugh without expectation. But the machine of fame made such moments rare, fleeting at best. The price of being king was that he could never again be ordinary. On some nights, back in his suite, the burden weighed too much. He'd sit at the piano, alone, playing gospel songs he'd grown up with in Tupelo. Those melodies, soft, sacred, were his refuge, They reminded him of a time before the crown, before Las Vegas, before the stage swallowed him whole. But even then, peace never lingered long. The phone would ring, the colonel would knock, another show awaited, another demand, another piece of Elvis to give away. It is here that the tragedy of the crown reveals itself. The world adored him for the very gifts that were consuming him: his generosity of spirit, his need to give, his refusal to say no. Those same qualities that made him beloved also left him depleted. By 1973, the contrast was stark. On stage, Elvis still roared, voice soaring, hips snapping, energy electrifying. But off stage, the cracks widened. Friends whispered about his health, family worried about his weight, and Elvis himself, though he rarely admitted it, felt the strain of a life too big for any man to carry. The king wore his crown with pride, but it was a crown forged in fire, heavy with expectation, and lined with thorn. To the world it was a symbol of glory. To Elvis, it was both honor and burden, the cost of giving everything and keeping almost nothing for himself. The Hilton suite was always full. Laughter echoed from the living room. Glasses clinked. The television blared. Yet in the middle of it all, Elvis often felt like a ghost in his own home. Men he barely knew lounged on his couches. Women floated in and out, drawn by the glow of his face. Old friends from Memphis rubbed shoulders with new acquaintances who had appeared overnight, each one eager to claim a piece of his orbit. To the untrained eye, it looked like a celebration. Elvis Presley, surrounded by admirers, living the high life. But peel back the noise, and a darker truth lingered. These rooms weren't filled with companions, they were filled with shadows, faces, who stayed because Elvis paid the bills, because the food never ran out, because being near him meant their lives carried a little sparkle. Few cared about Elvis, the man. They cared about Elvis, the legend, the access, the perks. Elvis knew it. He wasn't blind. Sitting quietly in the corner, he'd watch the room, the easy way hands reached for whatever they wanted, the constant hum of expectation. A scarf here, a story there, another round of drinks on his tab, always taking, rarely giving. The circle tightened around him, but it was not a circle of trust. It was a ring of strangers who smiled wide, but asked for more. Colonel Parker encouraged it, insisting Elvis needed the company, the energy, the distraction. But Elvis, deep down, longed for something simpler. He wanted true companionship, the kind he'd known back in Tupelo, when friends weren't measuring what they could get from him. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he'd test them. He'd sit at the piano, start playing gospel songs, the kind no one in that room knew how to sing, and as his voice filled the space, the chatter would fade, replaced by awkward silence. Because in those songs, Elvis revealed himself, raw and unguarded, and few knew how to meet him there. The loneliness of that realization cut deep. How could a man be surrounded by so many, yet feel so alone? The truth was, the crowd never left. Even when the curtain closed, even when the showroom emptied, the crowd followed him into his suite, into his living room, into his very life. And while the cheers of the Hilton audiences lifted him, the constant drain of these false companions hollowed him out. It was the paradox of his world, adored by millions, yet starving for one real connection. Every laugh in that room came with a cost. Every handshake carried expectation. Elvis gave, and gave, and gave, until he often wondered what was left for himself, and still he rarely pushed them away. Perhaps because for all their flaws, their presence kept him from facing the darkest truth of all, that without them, without the noise, without the constant orbit of strangers, he might be forced to confront just how lonely the king of rock and roll really was. The public saw Elvis as invincible. To the world,
He was a glittering figure draped in rhinestones, the voice that shook arenas, the man whose every move sent crowds into frenzy. But step beyond the spotlight, and the myth unraveled. In private, Elvis was a son who missed his mother every day. He was a father who bent low to listen to Lisa Marie's giggles, sometimes crawling across the carpet just to make her laugh. He was a man who carried the weight of everyone's expectations, but rarely found a safe place to put down his own. One evening in 1973, after a performance that left the Hilton showroom roaring, Elvis returned to his suite drained. The entourage followed, as they always did, carrying their laughter and demands. But in the quiet hours after midnight, when the party thinned, Elvis slipped away to his piano. Only Charlie Hodge lingered, sensing his friend needed company, but not conversation. Elvis's fingers moved slowly at first, touching the keys, as if they might burn. Then came the soft chords of You'll Never Walk Alone. His voice, stripped of stage power, filled the room like a prayer. Charlie sat quietly in the shadows, not daring to interrupt. Here was the real Elvis. No jumpsuit, no roaring crowd, just a man searching for God in the notes, for peace in the pauses. The myth said Elvis had everything. The man showed otherwise. He battled insomnia, fear of disappointing his fans, the gnawing ache of being used. Some nights he reached for the pills the doctors gave him. Other nights he reached for gospel, hoping the music might heal what medicine could not. And still he gave. Even in his darkest hours, Elvis poured out compassion for strangers. He donated anonymously to charities, sent checks to widows he never met, gifted cars to staff who thought they'd be ignored. But each act was more than generosity. It was a plea to be seen as human, not just as the king. What happens when the myth you live by begins to smother the man inside? How long can someone carry the crown before it crushes them? These were questions Elvis rarely spoke aloud, but the evidence lived in his habit. The long nights awake at Graceland, the quiet conversations with Red West, the rare moments where his smile faded, and you could glimpse the burden behind it. Charlie once said, when he sang gospel, that was the only time I saw him at peace. And maybe that was true, because in those songs, Elvis could set down the myth and just be the boy from Tupelo, poor, barefoot, and hungry for hope. But the world never stopped demanding the king. No matter how heavy the weight, Elvis carried it, because for him, the music was not just performance, it was promise. Promise to the widowed father in the balcony, promise to the child holding a bootleg record in a small town, promise that no one, not even the forgotten, was alone. In those rare glimpses of the man behind the myth, Elvis revealed his truest gift, not the voice, not the fame, but the compassion that pulsed through every note, even when it cost him more than anyone could see. Years later, the Las Vegas Hilton still carried the memory of that night. Bootleg recordings circulated among fans, scratches and pops. Yet every note of You Gave Me a Mountain lingered with a weight no studio version could match. In the recordings, you could hear the father's sobs in the balcony, the room shifting into a dead silence as Elvis adjusted the song, slowed each lyric, and poured compassion through the microphone. Ushers like Carla Jennings often recounted the night in hushed tone. I've never seen a showroom go dead silent like that, she said decades later. It was like time itself paused. You could hear hearts breaking and mending in the same moment. Letters arrived at Graceland from fans who had witnessed the night first. Many wrote to the widowed father, who had become a quiet symbol of human fragility met with unexpected grace. Some attended his wife's memorial, offering flowers they had carried from their own small towns. Others left anonymous notes with words like, "Even legends can feel what we feel." The Hilton staff preserved mementos, scarf threads, handwritten notes, ticket stubs tucked into scrapbooks. Elvis's own archives noted the unusual performance, calling it the night of silence. For a man who measured success by applause, this was a different metric: empathy, compassion, and a moment where fame bent to the needs of another. Even in press clippings, the story endured. The Vegas Sun, July 20th, headlined, "Elvis stuns crowd to silence." Reporters tried to capture the spectacle, but words fell short. How could they convey a man stopping the show not to punish, but to comfort? The ripples stretched beyond the walls of the Hilton. Fans in distant states wrote to the father. Children who had never seen the show in person grew up listening to bootleg tapes, learning that vulnerability and kindness could coexist with strength. The story became a lesson in empathy, a blueprint for how even a crowd of thousands could witness, absorb, and carry forward the weight of one person's sorrow. And for Elvis himself, it marked a quiet triumph, one no chart position could measure. The king realized that true legacy was not the number of sold-out shows, but the depth of hearts touched. He understood that moments of compassion could echo across decades, leaving impressions far stronger than the glittering fame that enveloped him nightly. Have you ever considered how one small act of understanding might ripple far beyond your sight? One evening in a Las Vegas showroom, a man's grief met with patience and care, and the effect spanned lifetime. For the widowed father, for the child who held a bootleg tape, for the thousands who witnessed, that night changed forever how they understood kindness, empathy, and the power of listening. The king's greatest act was quiet, almost invisible, yet its echo carried farther than any cheer, louder than any ovation. The curtains finally fell on the Las Vegas Hilton that night, but the echoes lingered far beyond the showroom walls. For most, it was another sold-out Elvis concert, another evening of glamour and excitement. But for those who were there, especially the widowed father, the experience carried a weight that would not fade. Elvis's choice to pause, to slow the song, to sing directly to one man's grief, was simple, yet revolutionary. It reframed fame, not as spectacle, but as responsibility, a reminder that even in arenas filled with thousands, every individual mattered. The king's microphone became more than a tool for entertainment. It became an instrument of empathy, a bridge between legend and humanity. The father never forgot the moment. He recalled how Elvis's eyes met his, not with judgment or irritation, but with understanding. How the audience, thousands strong, had shifted from noise to quiet solidarity. How strangers had passed tissues, whispered prayers, and acknowledged that grief could be honored collectively. It was a lesson that silence can sometimes speak louder than applause. Years later, that night became a symbol in letters, scrapbooks, and plaques. The night of silence. Fans retold the story to children, grandchildren, and friends, teaching them that greatness is measured, not just in talent or charisma, but in the courage to recognize and nurture the humanity around you. And perhaps that is the enduring moral. No matter the spotlight, no matter the applause, our truest impact lies in the moments we choose compassion over performance. It is in the quiet gestures, the personal acknowledgments, the willingness to see one person even when thousands clamor for attention. What would you do if you had the microphone? If in a room of thousands, a single act of kindness could ripple outward, shaping lives in ways you may never witness. Elvis understood that lesson. His legend endures, not only because of the songs he sang, or the jumpsuits he wore, but because he once transformed a room, a night, and countless hearts, through a single act of empathy. And in that reflection, the Hilton night reminds us, fame's true measure is not in numbers filled, but in the broken hearts we are willing to heal. And sometimes the courage to pause, to listen, and to respond with compassion is the act that defines a life. As the lights dim, as the crowd files out in quiet awe, the question remains, not of legend but of all of us. In the presence of another's pain, will we turn away, or will we let our own humanity shine through? Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that compassion can transform even the largest crowd. Reflect on the moments when you can pause, listen, and act with kindness, because true greatness is measured not by fame, but by the lives touched in ways that echo long after the applause fades.